We're so excited to have Jon Tyson with us. He's our Bible study leader for the gathering. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Now, Trinity is actually a congregation that's 11-fold, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we are a network of neighborhood churches in the city of New York. We call a family of churches. And we've been there for 10 years, having the time of our life. It's very hard. Wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
Now, you said this never was on your mind. I mean, you started out as a butcher. It just seems like this is just a complete world away.
It is, yeah. I was a butcher in Adelaide, South Australia, and then became a Christian and ended up moving to the US to study theology and marrying an American, and then this has been the rest of my life. So,
any of your other family also kind of moved to the United States as well, or do you have to vacation kind of the long way?
Both of my family live out in the country, in the middle of nowhere in Australia, so they have no idea which part of the gene pool I came from to be an urban person in the middle of New York.
Now, earlier on, you talked about kind of a celebration that happened when you came over and found out that you, in fact, were going to get a free education. Unpack that a little bit. I mean, how did this happen? What took place?
It's too long a story for this, but basically, one of my father's friends when he was a young man ended up becoming the president of a denomination in Australia. And when I became a Christian, he said, "Hey, I'd love to help John out with theological education if he wants." And he had a friend who was the president of a college in Georgia. And so he called his friend, and his friend said, "Hey, we'd love to have him." And so when I was 20, I packed up everything I owned into 2 suitcases and immigrated to the United States.
So you had actually pressed out this idea. You wanted to study theology in the midst?
I just wanted to serve God. I didn't know if I wanted to be an evangelist or a pastor or a teacher or whatever. I just wanted to serve God and study theology. So I moved here, and I loved it.
That was obviously encouraged in your home, or was this kind of wow, that's a novel idea, John, that you would want to do that?
I think my parents were thrilled based on who I'd been previously in my teenage years. The thought of me becoming a pastor and serving God probably brought my parents a lot of joy. So
yeah. Now, in order to do something like this, my guess is you surround yourself with a number of people that are really encouraging you. Who would have those people been, or did you have?
Yeah, I had phenomenal youth pastors. I had phenomenal leaders who saw me, believed in me, called things out of my life, and basically spent time developing me. So I'm one of those. It's actually rare today. You meet a lot of people who have a discipleship wound. If you were to say in church, how many of you have been well discipled? Most people would say, I've never been discipled. I'm so thankful. I've been discipled by a couple of different people, and they've literally equipped me in the biblical sense of the term. So I was so grateful for that.
Now, you came from more rural into probably one of the most industrious cities in the world.
Yeah.
What have been some of probably the biggest challenges that you've found as you've moved into New York City?
The transiency, how often people leave the city. You feel like you're always planting a church. It's never stable. It's challenging to institutionalize because there's so much movement. That's definitely a big challenge. The cost of living there, very, very hard. Raising children has been challenging, but way easier than we thought. So New York it's in the details of doing everyday life, it's hard, but in terms of the values, what they're exposed to, the opportunities, it's been a very, very rich experience.
And when you talk about challenges in terms of it's easier, then what is that easier?
Well, it's easier to have a minivan that drives to a lovely house in a quiet suburb where you pull in and close the door and everybody has their own space. That is easier than packing kids into a shared bedroom in the middle of a tiny apartment where your neighbours complain about how loud your kids are.
Yeah.
But apart from the practical details, the values they learn in New York, multicultural, global, urban, they're exposed to some of the best art, best government, best politics. There's so many things the city offers, and if you take advantage of it, your kids actually receive a life education that is remarkably rich, and that's been definitely reflected in my kids' journey.
Now, you often talk about this place, this turnaround of people coming and going is actually a plus for what you're doing. I mean, you're kind of a launching pad. I understand it's difficult when you're trying to build into someone and you expect them to be a leader there for a period of time, but at some point you started realizing that this was a launching pad of sorts into all sorts of other industries, opportunities in which the kingdom's going to grow. What happened?
Basically, I think I would describe I had a theological conversion out of just thinking my call was to build the church, which is actually Jesus' job, and to realize that our job is to seek first the kingdom, and the kingdom of God is larger than organized Christian events. It's about the rule and reign of God in all of life. And so I realized that the goal of the church is to equip people for mission, and that mission, for the most part, is played out in the workspace. So I spent a lot of time trying to catch up on some theology about faith, work, vocation, mission, and how these things come together. And that's reformed how we do discipleship and how we think of people. So I'm not trying to extract people from their industries to serve in our church. I'm trying to equip people in our church to renew and participate in God's work in their industries.
And you've even taken that further, because you're actually head of a church collective that's actually planting more and more of these fellowships. So you're taking this even to the point of not just individually, we're talking collectively moving these communities out.
Yeah, we're trying to. We started 2 organizations. One's called the Center for City Renewal, that has 3 pillars: vocation, justice, and civility. And we want it to be a third space between the church and the city, where Christians will be prepared to think very, very thoughtful theological formation around issues of justice, issues of vocation, and issues of civility. So in very contested space like New York, how do we form people to think, act, love, and serve like Jesus with a really thoughtful manner? So we started that for people in New York, and we have a church planning network called City Collective, which is churches that are in cities with a similar theological vision and focus like ours, that we're trying to help them do a better job where they are.
Wilberforce used to have the twofold abolition of slavery, reformation of manners. Is that what you mean by civility? When you say civility, what do you mean by that?
I think civility, I basically mean how to get along graciously in a culture like ours. We are not in a homogenous culture. The whole world is flat now. We're dealing with people from all over the world, every kind of religion, every kind of worldview. And often people are threatened by that, or they fall into instincts of self-preservation. And fear and self-preservation are not compelling narratives for the world. So we wanted to figure out, how do we graciously, it's basically like convicted civility. How do we still hold our convictions, but in a very gracious way, love, serve, partner together, see the humanity in other people, and move forward. But we're not going back to a homogenous past. It's over. And so how do we move forward as the people of God, faithfully, graciously, with conviction in a global society? That's what we're trying to figure out.
These 2 messages that you've already had, you had the first one on blessing, the second one today on celebration. Mm-hmm. These were really intentional. What were you thinking about the gathering, or what were you thinking about the world in which we're dealing with, in which these 2 messages came to mind?
I think what I was thinking about was in the busyness of life, in the stewardship of resources, in the pressure of success, sometimes our motives can be less than perfect. And people often address behavior, but they don't address motive. So I just wanted to speak to the heart. How do we bless people? How do we not withhold our blessing or make people earn blessing or hold up ungodly standards around that? So you can be successful in everything, but if you don't feel blessed, you still feel like a spiritual failure. So I wanted people to get that in their hearts. We have every spiritual blessing, and then as a result, we're free to give everything away. So that was one part. Celebrations, like, I feel like so often people work so hard, or they're sometimes tempted to restrain themselves because they don't want to be excessive. And the gospel is excessive. The grace of God is excessive. It's not moderate. It uses words like He's lavished on us. That in the coming ages He might show the incomparable riches. So I feel every now and then we need to turn the tap on in our joy and celebrate that a little bit more. So I feel like that's a pillar in a culture that thinks that Christians are sad and angry and depressed, that we'd actually have a vision of promoting joy.
Taking a look at kind of the whole perspective of America, you really do come from a third-party perspective. You didn't grow up here, but you're embedded here now. I mean,
I've spent half my life.
You're in the heart of the city.
Yeah,
a little perspective, maybe even a theological perspective on what you're seeing in America today.
Yeah. Os Guinness calls America a cut flower society, which means we still have a little color in the flower, but it's been severed from its root. And I think that's true. And I think there's a real cultural lament. People they're saddened by what America's become. They look at our political candidates, I think on both sides, and they're definitely uneasy, and they wondered kind of how we got here. And I've been reflecting on Isaiah chapter 6. It's a famous passage where Isaiah receives his prophetic call. But it starts with the phrase, in the year that King Uzziah died. And I'd realized I'd never studied King Uzziah. And King Uzziah was one of the favorite kings that the people of Judah had. He reigned for over 50 years. He followed God. And he did two things well. He protected them, so he was a military leader. He conquered their enemies around him. He invented military technologies that were safety, and he provided for them. It says Uzziah was a man who loved the soil. He cared about agriculture. And what people want is protection and provision. That's what they want from their leaders. At the end of his life, he got proud, and he went into the temple to offer incense, and God struck him with leprosy in the face. And he had to hide in shame for the rest of his life. And he was a beloved king who got prideful. And everybody was wondering, what's going to happen next? Who's going to be our leader? And in the midst of that, Isaiah gets a prophetic call where he sees not just the temple, but he sees the Lord high and exalted. And God elevates his vision above the political sphere to the kingdom of God. And marked by this vision of the kingdom of God, he begins to see, okay, this is really what's happening behind the scenes. It doesn't matter about the political leader. God is still on the throne. His kingdom is still advancing. And then he has this vision of personal humility where he says, woe am I, I'm undone. Yeah. And then he says, send me. So I think our response should be not to focus on who our political leaders are and to be in fear about that, to lift our eyes and see a vision of God, that he is glorious, the whole earth is full of his glory, the train of his robe fills the temple. That we would have personal humility, stop comparing ourselves to others. People ask me all the time, what's happened with sin? And I say, here's what's happened with sin in our generation. Sin's moved from a criminal court to a civil court. So instead of measuring ourselves before God, we're just comparing ourselves with others. But Isaiah sees God and he says, I'm undone. And we need that humility. You will always be judgmental if you compare yourself to others. But when you get a vision of God, it produces humility. And then out of that humility, he's like, I'm ready to tell people the good news that God's coming. So what I wish people in America would see is they would look past the political dysfunction, get a true vision of God, have a desire for personal humility, and be agents of his kingdom sent into the world. If we'd focus on that, we'd be a way healthier church, and I think Christians would have more integrity.
Are you running for president?
I am running for president. I can't because I wasn't born here. You got to be born here on national soil, man. You know the controversy.
Well,
was he born here?
Well, you could open it up again.
Yeah. I'm a churchman. This is my world. I love just being a pastor and serving God's people.
Your name is coming up in a lot of these conversations with friends across the country, places where they've seen you, your message is getting out. It appears that your agenda is filling up more and more and more, which drives me to ask, how do you remain fresh in the midst of a schedule that doesn't seem to be slowing down?
Yeah, my agenda is to pastor the people of my church. That's like my primary focus. So I try and have pretty good boundaries. Obviously you live in seasons. Sometimes you're playing in the finals, you got to play hurt. But for the most part, I have pretty good boundaries and try and practice the biblical Sabbath, try and take time off when my kids are out of school so I can be with them. If everybody knew who my wife was, they would realize that I've married wisely and that my wife does a very good job of letting me know what reality is.
Well, I think what was the thing she said after the shattering of a shin?
It was like, totally worth it.
Totally worth it, which had us all going, this is an incredible woman.
Yeah, my wife is a strong woman.
A steel woman.
She would say, her quote is, I'm not passive-aggressive, I'm aggressive-aggressive. And if you know my wife, you know it's true. So it's people say, do you ever feel like you're going to struggle with pride? And I'm like, no. I mean, I could struggle with it, but that will be resolved quickly by my wife.
Well,
She's beautiful. I love her so much. She's a perfect partner.
Well, next time you need to bring her. Yeah. I think she would enjoy the ocean and enjoy the...
She'd probably just be sitting there with a broken leg in the water.
Well, we're so delighted you're here. Your enthusiasm is infectious. We've picked it up at the gathering, and we can't wait to hear what you're going to say tomorrow.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. It really is a joy to be here.
Thanks for being here.